Hello and welcome to Future You, the podcast brought to you by graduate careers experts Prospects. I'm your host, Emily Slade, and in this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Amanda McCorkindale to discuss available courses at the Humanitarian and Conflict Response Institute at the University of Manchester. We discuss the mental health repercussions of such heavy topics, how students learn from past crises, what jobs are available after graduation, and more.
So my name is Dr. Amanda McCorkindale. I am a lecturer in Humanitarian Studies at the University of Manchester in the Humanitarian and Conflict Response Institute, and I'm here to talk to you about HCRI today.
Perfect. And can you describe what that is, please?
Sure. So the Humanitarian and Conflict Response Institute is a higher education program at the University of Manchester. We have undergraduate and postgraduate programs. Our undergraduate program is called the International Disaster Management and Humanitarian Response, BSc. And our postgraduate programs, we have quite a few of those. I'll go through them in a bit, but to tell you a bit about the Institute, we are a multidisciplinary research institute. So we're one of the few research institutes at the University of Manchester where we have both a research initiative where we get to do cutting edge research every day as lecturers, but we also have an education aspect to what we do. So within our institute, almost all of my colleagues will be researching something important to them, but they'll also be teaching about those topics almost every day in the classroom. And our topics generally range from humanitarian studies, which I'm sure I'll talk about in a moment as well. But we also look at medicine, development studies, disaster response, conflict, basically any type of disaster or conflict situation you can think of, both currently that's happening, but historically that's happened as well. So we have been developed to kind of think about how do we learn about these topics and think of a way to improve going forward.
Did you want to lean more into what humanitarian studies is?
Yeah, so humanitarian studies is looking at how do we respond to disasters, to crises around the world. So humanitarian, traditionally, this is a bit the lecture in me coming out, so apologies in advance. But when we think of the term humanitarian, generally we're thinking about people who work for the Red Cross, for an example, or Médecins Sans Frontières, or people who are helping out in crises and disasters. They're the people that wear the big Red Cross or trying to provide aid or help in these situations. So humanitarian studies is kind of what it says on the box. We're studying those examples. We're studying those aspects of what does it mean to be a humanitarian and how can we go into this field, go into this aspect, into this discipline more effectively. So HCRI was to an extent created because this idea of humanitarians and those who are going in and responding to crises, they're always responding within the moment. There's a disaster or a conflict that suddenly takes place and everything happens at a very fast pace. You don't necessarily have time to stop and think about what's our history or what experience have we had working in this area over the last 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. They don't have that time to be reflective. They have the moment to respond to that crisis as quickly as possible so that they can get the most urgent help to those people who are in need, to those who need it most. So it might be medical care, it might be shelter, it might be water, sanitation, hygiene, which is widely underappreciated in the humanitarian sector, but very much needed. But all of these aspects of how do we get food and things to people as quickly as possible. But what we've realized and what is clear across the sector is that this willingness to help and to do good can oftentimes create a number of problems. And it is that willingness to help without the hindsight of how we may have failed in the past, that creation of that problem is what we're trying to look at and what we try to explore and what we teach our students. So since the early 1990s, there's this professionalization within the humanitarian sector of these people, these do-gooders who have been going into different areas around the world trying to help. And this idea of it is a profession, it's a rising profession of people who try to help. And with that, our institute was created in, I think it was 2008, And it was founded by a number of academics and practitioners from different sectors, thinking about how could we more effectively be responding to these disasters and crises. So in 1998, I think, no, in 2008, sorry, there was this coming together, as I said, of humanitarian practitioners and academics. So we had one of the past presidents of Médecins Sans Frontières, someone called Dr. Roni Brauman. He was the president between 1982 and 1994, I think. So some of those like pivotal years in MSF's history. He actually met one of our founding history academics, Professor Bertrand Tate, in the MSF archives in France, in Paris. And they were talking about, wouldn't it be great if there was more time and space to study the past cases that MSF had been involved in and the work that they were doing in the past, to understand how you could learn from those lessons. As a historian myself as well, thinking about, instead of repeating history and repeating those mistakes, how can we break some of those cycles? So Roni and Bertrand, as well as other academics such as Professor Peter Gattrell, Professor Tim Jacoby, Dr. Tanya Mueller, and Professor Tony Redman, who's an emergency medical doctor, created HCRI with that idea of having that time and space to explore those past examples of humanitarian responses and think about what are some of those major trends that we could see across these different areas, but then think about how could we improve it. It's well and good to learn about the past, but how can we prepare our students to be agile and to be adaptive and think about how to push the humanitarian sector so it does better in what it's trying to do, and it can ultimately help more people. So that was the long answer, but the short answer, I think, is for humanitarian studies is how can we more how can we better prepare our students to respond to the crises and disasters that are happening around the world without them having to make those mistakes for themselves?
So why is this important in today's society?
That's a great question. And I think, unfortunately, the world is not short of problems. If you look at the headlines from today or from this week, you see conflict, you see extreme weather events, you see natural hazards, you see famine, you see all sorts happening around the world. And there will always be people in the world who want to respond and who want to help in these situations. They have this intrinsic need to help one another with this idea of promoting humanity and human welfare, one of the core principles within the Red Cross and within the humanitarian sector as a whole. And so long as those crises and disasters and events are happening, we should be studying and we should be exploring where things have gone well and where things haven't gone well. And unfortunately, there are a lot of examples where things haven't gone well. And a lot of it might be because they don't have the time and space to think about it while it's happening. But I think there's also a case of just not really being as sympathetic or understanding to different historical contexts and different cultural contexts that lead to misunderstandings and lead to wider issues. So it's important in today's society to study this topic and these issues, so that way we can hopefully, while trying to help in a way that reinforces the in-country infrastructures and the local populations, and finding our space within that to help. And it might not be going to the country. It might not be responding in the way that you think it is. Sometimes it's just raising awareness about an issue, or perhaps it's recognizing that your space or your place isn't there at that moment. But in today's society, that aspect of wanting to help and wanting to respond when you feel so powerless, I think, when you read the newspaper and you see everything that's going on, but you have this will and this ambition to try to help make the world a better place. I have a lot of very idealistic students who have the best of intentions, and it's fantastic to teach them every day. But I think it is that sense of being powerless in this wide world. So learning about this and equipping yourself with the skills to think and analyze a situation from multiple perspectives of, is this the right place? Should we be responding? Or how could we more effectively help here? I think that'll always be necessary within our society. And while it is very geared up within this sector, our students go on to so many different careers where they put these skills to use that even though it is very niche as a topic and quite a long degree title to say, I think, we do have a lot of acronyms, so be warned. It is something that you can apply to almost any other job sector, and our students do go on and apply it to many different job sectors as well.
Mm.
But you know that they're going in and they're being informed global citizens, that they're kind of walking into this, being able to analyze the environment that's around them and come to some solid conclusions based on all of these different disciplines that we kind of force them to study and then to learn more about. So yeah.
I was going to say, who is it that comes to study? Who are your student base and where do they end up going?
That is a great question. I would love to say that, X is our typical student, but the way that HCRI works is we do recruit from, specific areas and you can see that when I go through some of the students that we have. But really, I think one of the core aspects of who our students are, they are those people that want to change the world, and they are the people that want to make a positive difference. And they come from every discipline you could possibly imagine. So we have a number of students coming from who are passionate in terms of looking at history or geography, political science, international relations theory. So, all of those kind of big hitters. We also have people coming from economics. So, thinking about things like supply trade and chains and logistics and that side. Um, and we also have those coming from a history background who just love learning about the stories of the past. So, some of our PhD students, for example, have written their dissertations on the stories of individual philanthropists over time and what that looks like in terms of the impact that they've made during their generation. And then we also have a number of practitioners. So our on-campus degrees. So like I said, we've got a lot of postgraduate degree programs. We have two that are on campus. One is an MA, a Master's of Arts in Humanitarian Conflict Response, which is HCR for short. And we have an MSc, which is a Master's of Science in International Disaster Management. So those are more, our MA in HCR is more focused on that historical aspect. So you have that one of the core modules is a history module, so the history of humanitarianism, or looking at the role of young people in humanitarianism over time. Or it might be the ever uplifting module of humanitarianism and genocide, which is quite a heavy topic to think about on a weekly basis. But it is that historical aspect. So there's more conflict related. We have anthropology in there as well. So it has that arts feeling around it slightly more so. Whereas the MSc in disaster management takes a focus looking instead at the disaster risk reduction resiliency side of our department. So your core modules kind of look at disaster management. We look at those logistics and supply chain aspects. You might have a simulation in some of our modules of how do you respond to different disasters and what that may look like. And so, but for both of these, our students coming onto them, for the master's programs at least, take a more traditional route of doing an undergraduate degree and then coming in and joining us for the master's. And for the most part, it is to kind of gain that experience and have that space to write a dissertation as well, where they can really demonstrate their expertise in a topic or a subject area, because this puts them far above when they're applying for jobs, when they can kind of come in and say, this was my master's and my specialist research was on conflict in South Sudan during this time and looking at how that impacted with natural resources. It really does set them apart when they're looking at applying for jobs.
Yeah.
It is, and you can see it when students go on to kind of talk about it and come back and talk to us about it, of how they said, oh, it was great. I could, they asked me questions, some asked to read my dissertation, and you feel like you're contributing something.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas our online degrees, we have an online master's in global health, which has different pathways that you can choose from. And we also have a program called LEAP, which I can't remember the acronym for that one at the moment, but it's Leadership Excellence Something Program. But that one was created in partnership with Médecins Sans Frontières. And the point of our online degrees is that they're part-time, so that they are designed for practitioners who are working in a variety of contexts, to be able to complete their masters and progress within their leadership chain within their organization. So, in this respect, a lot of our online students are either medical doctors, a lot of them are medical doctors, I have to say. So, they might be working within the NHS in the UK. So, they could be, an ICU or anaesthetist registrar or consultant. So, have a very serious daytime job. And then they're doing their assignments and discussion boards for me at nighttime. And then we also have a number of students who are working for the Red Cross, for Médecins Sans Frontières, I've had people working for the Navy and the Air Force, who are medical doctors or nurses within those aspects as well, but also just people who are in leadership positions in those organizations who are looking to get a different perspective in the situations and contexts in which they're working. So for our students there, they are around the world. They're based everywhere. And their experiences, you'll get an email saying they couldn't submit their assignment one night because the electricity went out where they were, because they're in a refugee settlement, or they're working from an active conflict zone, so in the Ukraine. We have doctors who are currently in Gaza as well. So thinking about that in terms of, the students that we have from that side, we have this wealth of practitioner practical experiences online with hundreds of students, all kind of giving their input and their examples. And then our on-campus students have this rich theoretical, academic-based discipline that they bring to the table. And in some of the online modules, you get this mixture of the two, because our on-campus students can take the online ones, and sometimes our online students, if they're taking one of the blended programs, they come and visit us on campus as well. So you then see this coming together of our academic and our practitioners, and the conversations you get, and the space to really think through some of the challenges that are facing the humanitarian sector. That's where some of these magic moments at least for me as an educator, kind of happen, because you can't replicate that. You can't make that up. And so that's something that's incredibly special about our institute, is just this wealth of very passionate individuals who want to create this change and create this difference, but getting to learn from those who are facing some of the hardest situations we could possibly imagine right now.
Yeah. And just on that, is mental health help is wider and wider available at most academic institutions, and it's getting better every year. But this course in particular feels like it's almost a necessity. So do you provide sort of mental health help, not only for those studying the more academic aspects, but for those out and about in actual war zones?
Yeah, the mental health aspect is so important, and it's something that ever since I've been with the institute. So I did the MA here at HCRI in 2010, 2011, and I was the second cohort of the master's program. But over the course of time, I've really seen a difference in terms of the mental health provision that we've provided. And I've been currently, my role within HCRI, we always kind of shuffle roles around within the department because we are quite small. I think there's about 40 of us all together who are teaching staff. But currently, I'm the director of our postgraduate programs, and I also do admissions recruitment. So whenever I'm kind of holding an open day for our programs, I include trigger warnings almost always when I introduce the degree program, because it is something that every single day that you come to university, that you open up one of these modules, that you even think about opening an article to read, it will be about trauma. It is about the most harrowing examples of challenging situations that society has faced historically and currently. So, how can we prepare our students to kind of go through this and to think about this? And we found over time that, having trigger warnings is incredibly important. As I mentioned, we kind of have it for the degrees as a whole of be warned, it is going to be a struggle. But we also think about how we can have both formal and informal support in terms of mental health support. So some of our informal support mechanisms are things like having peer mentors for first year students. So they get a buddy from somebody who's older within our undergraduate program that they can talk through some of the issues they may be having, or just have that support of talking through any challenges that they're facing with the course or just settling into the university, so they don't feel quite like they're on their own when they start. And we found that's been really helpful in terms of creating that network, but also creating that community. Because our undergraduate programs, we like to keep them small. We like to get to know our students. So I think we have about 30 to 40 students on our single honors program. And then we have another 15 to 20 who do our joint language. They do the degree with a joint language aspect. And we really get to know them. And generally, I'm one of the course conveners on one of our first semester modules. That's all theory. It's pretty heavy stuff. And getting to our students in that very first semester, you get to see their journey throughout their undergraduate degree. And this year, I was lucky enough to also teach them in a third year module that I created. It's called Ethical Decision Making Under Pressure. So I was looking at their ethical positionality. And I think within our teaching, having those like trigger warnings within it helps prepare them to an extent. But it's always going to be difficult when, like I said, for that first year module, one of the case studies we discussed week in and week out was the Rwandan genocide. Like, how can you ever appropriately prepare someone to read about genocide every week? Or to learn that some of the institutions that you've always looked up to or you've always thought were, the good guys, quote unquote, some of the things that they've done in the past. So, mistakes that the UN has made or individuals within the UN have made. So thinking about that, it is important to kind of have regular check-ins with your academic advisor, which is something we do regularly throughout each semester. And that academic advisor is somebody that is an academic member of staff. But we have a number of kind of check-in points each semester with our first year students. It's mandatory for first years. And then as it progresses, it backs off. To allow them that time and space to talk about what may be bothering them and for us to pick up on when we need to signpost them for further help. So it might be, counseling services that are offered and free from the University of Manchester, or it might be having a bit more of a formal conversation. In the past, we've also had, coffee afternoons and things like that, where you just have that space to talk. And I think it's important to show students your vulnerability sometimes as a lecturer and show them that you can be emotional about everything that you're reading about, and it is hard to cope with. And as lecturers, it's something that we do struggle to cope with sometimes. I remember a moment that from this past year teaching my ethics course where I was talking about, the effects of COVID as a mum and my family, and thinking about, those choices you have to make when you're going through something. And I was emotional thinking about it and talking about it to my class. But I think because I showed some of that vulnerability at the time, it created the safe space where my students could also reflect on their own vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And it created a very authentic moment of discussing those challenges that we all kind of faced and thinking about the choices that we're making and working through it. So I think that idea of creating a community and creating those safe spaces, which is something that we also have within our handbooks, but the actual implementation of what is a safe space. So, it's safe to ask those questions that might be a bit more challenging, but also think about it's the safe place to be vulnerable. Um, and I've had one of my online students in the past has we've done some workshops together, and she kind of feedback from one of the sessions that we ran with a group of medical doctors who work for the military was that we were creating the safe space to fail and safe space to make those decisions and think things through, where you don't want to do that in a situation where people could lose their lives potentially, or
Mhm.
could be injured based on the decision that you're making. So having these spaces where it's kind of safe for them to fail and to work through that is incredibly important. So in terms of the mental health aspect of how do we then support our students, we recognize that every one of our students will have, as the cliche of everyone has mental health, just like physical health, everyone has this degree of mental health, and where we currently sit with it of, how am I feeling today? How am I doing? And then thinking about when it, can I ask for help, and who do I go to ask for help? And because we're a small department, then I think those opportunities to check in with our students and have them check in with us present themselves regularly. So we can support our students when they're having those moments that are challenging, because we will all face it at some point where we're having a challenging day based on what we're reading about or studying about.
Mm.
And sometimes it's recognizing that, or being slightly more forceful with our students in telling them to stop reading at a
Yeah.
certain point of the day, because I've had students in the past tell me, when they're reading about some of the topics we cover, and they'll be reading just before they go to bed, and they were having nightmares.
Yeah.
Um, so we had to put a curfew on when they could read till, and then said, right, your homework is to not do your reading after 6 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
And instead you have to go watch some
Watch
like rubbish
cartoons.
TV. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Go just watch something else, do something that makes you happy.
Mm.
But you're not allowed to read this topic at night. Like, you
Wow,
cannot.
yeah.
So even just kind of thinking through and working through with them what type of schedule, because they also feel this responsibility to learn about it. So as much as I would say, like, for students who perhaps have faced some of the issues that we teach about, which are very sensitive topics, and they may identify with some of the things that are going on, um, and we always give the option of, if you get upset, you can always, we'll give trigger warnings beforehand, but if you need to excuse yourself from a lecture or from a period within the teaching, it's kind of a no questions asked, just you excuse yourself, and we'll check in with you afterwards to make sure everything's okay. But if it becomes too much, then please do, we won't be offended if you need to go out for a breath of fresh air. um, but at the same time, it's, if you say that to students, they still have this sense of, but I want to learn about it. So it's that balance of, and I have this responsibility to learn about it.
Mm.
So trying to find that balance so that they can learn about it and they can understand it, so they can enact positive change because they've learned about it, but also balancing it up so it's not damaging their mental health and it's not creating problems for them and their personal lives in order
Yeah.
to cope with it. So we're trying to build the best practice in terms of coping mechanisms throughout their degree, while knowing that humanitarians who are working in situ still struggle with that now.
Mm.
And it is a sense of, if you're working in situ for 6 weeks, seeing some of the worst possible scenarios, it is going to be a struggle. But how can we help build that mental resiliency so
Mhm.
that our students are more adept at being prepared for this, or being able to respond to it
Yeah.
in a way that has positive coping strategies as opposed to negative coping strategies.
Yeah. Hopefully something a bit lighter now. As someone who
Mhm.
yourself was a student on the course, can you describe the student experience at Manchester?
Of course. So, as I mentioned, I yeah, I was a master's student at HCRI between 2010 and 2011. My accent, you may or may not be able to tell, it's not very Mancunian. I'm originally from the States. I'm from New York. So I don't sound like a New Yorker either, unless I get annoyed, then the New Yorker comes out. But I did my undergraduate degree back in the US, and I also did a master's in education and teaching in the US, but it was for secondary school students. And it was when I was teaching that I became disillusioned with the students to an extent, always asking to raise money for like Red Nose Day, things like that. And if you asked them why they were raising that money or who it was going to go and help, they never had an answer. So I remember, being on Google and like searching for degree programs about humanitarianism, and the master's popped up at the time. And I was reading through it and I thought, oh, this is perfect. This is just what I want to do. And I signed up to do the master's. It was a 1-year program and it was fantastic. I came down to Manchester. We were the second cohort. So the first cohort from HCRI only had 4 students on the master's program. And so we were the second cohort and there were about 40 of us. And the students that I learned with at the time came from so many different backgrounds and had such rich experiences that they were bringing to the table. And now when you look back and see what they're kind of up to at this point in time, they've gone on to do some of the most incredible things that are just inspiring when you read any of their kind of updates through social media or LinkedIn, etc. But on campus at Manchester, it has changed quite a bit since 2010, 2011, and it's really, I feel like because they've changed Oxford Road a bit, so the main street that goes down the middle of the university, so that it's just the buses, it's pedestrianized to a large extent. There's a lot of cycling opportunities. So it feels more like a campus as opposed to a university that's in the middle of Manchester. Um, and it's so vibrant. I mean, between the different academic sides of it and I used to love, and I still love, all the research seminars that HCRI would put on that are inevitably followed by like a wine and cheese event or something, some sort of mixer afterwards where you get to speak with the people who came to give the talk and get to network and have those conversations. But it's just such a vibrant community. And there's so many students on campus from different programs. But within HCRI, it's just this small little oasis of like-minded individuals. So we get to know each other really well, but we're still part of this big, vibrant university that has so much going on between the student union. But then also, if you think about, I think we've got like 3 different music venues that are all next to each other.
Wow.
Which is next door to my building where my office is. So I always think it's fun when you can see the little tour buses out the back of Manchester Academy or something. I'm like, oh, I wonder who's playing tonight and what's happening tonight. Or they can't find the stage door at the back and you're giving them directions to it. So it just feels like there's just so much between the music scene and the arts culture within Manchester as a whole, with a number of museums and aspects like that. It's just so vibrant. It was funny because, so the University of Manchester, we also have a museum. So we've got the Manchester Museum, which is smack dab in the middle of our campus as well. And they've just redone it. And I have 3 small children and I brought them to the museum. And there's a big like T-Rex skeleton in one of the rooms. And they loved it. They thought it was amazing. But they also saw one of the staff members with the same badge that I have. And so they asked the staff member at the museum, like, oh, do you know my mummy? Because she works here too. I'm like, I work at the university. So had to explain I don't get to like work with the dinosaur bones. But it was funny because we did all of that. They had a great time. And then like 2 days after that, because of the way the museum's set up, there's also like a private section behind some doors that you come in through a different entrance. And it's in one of the older areas of the university, one of the older buildings. And so I had a staff day on that other side of the doors. So I had to walk in through these other doors and I could take a picture of the dinosaur, but from behind and looking into the museum.
Oh, wow.
So I showed that to my children that night and I was like, see, I got to see the museum from this angle today too. And isn't that exciting? So I think it's just this nice aspect of, you do have museums that you can explore during your lunch hour, or that you can just hang out in, like, and in the Whitworth Gallery, things like that.
Mm.
And you have opportunities to go to music venues and so many different societies and clubs and sports. You just, the opportunities are endless if that's what you want to pursue. Like every Wednesday afternoon, we don't have any teaching, so that it encourages students to join sports teams or activities. So they have that space. And we encourage our students to do that as well. But since that time, HCRI, we have a group of students who have created the HCRI Society for those within our department, but also those who aren't in our department, but who are enthusiastic about this. So they go on socials and plan activities and things to kind of help with that mental health aspect that we spoke about before, but also just to give something to do, as well as everything else of how can we help, and creating that like-minded group of individuals. So I've really enjoyed my time at Manchester, and it's completely sucked me in. I've been institutionalized entirely, so I'm pretty biased, I'm not gonna lie. Um, so between from doing my master's, I then went on and did a PhD within HCRI, looking at empathy and humanitarianism, so learning about this through empathy.
Mm.
And then I've been lecturing here ever since, so I am very much institutionalized. I would have to say, if you're coming to Manchester, you do want to have some good, like, waterproof gear, because it does rain, unfortunately more than you'd like it to. But if you're prepared, it doesn't matter.
Nice,
So we make the
yes.
best of it regardless of the weather.
Mhm. Oh, brilliant. You mentioned comic relief there. Is that something that your students get to discuss, how these events are reported on in the media, or bigger events like Eurovision, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I think we at the moment we don't have a module on the media and humanitarian identity, I would almost say. But it is something that comes up and is seen in our dissertations every year. I'm always supervising dissertations on the use of the media within these aspects. So it might be how it's portrayed, or how fundraising initiatives look, or how do we use how have voices been used, so case studies, things like that, been used to kind of represent the stories of different individuals in fundraising initiatives through comic relief, or if you think of a number of the other ones that are currently going on. But we also talk about them historically, so like the negative connotations around some of them, like Band-Aid in the 1980s, for example,
Mm.
and think about the responsibility we have, not only when we're giving money to these organizations, but being a bit more critical about where is that money going and who is it actually going to help? And is that something that we're prepared to support? And how do you kind of figure that out? How do you weigh it up? Because it's easy to say, no, we're not going to give money to this or that because there's evidence you've, had to give resources to the other side in a conflict, or to local gangs or something like that, to gain access. But when you actually look at the wider perspective, unfortunately, that's something that may have to happen in order to gain access to help the people that need it the most.
Mm.
So it's easy to kind of judge based on newspaper titles, things like that, of those headlines, whether it's good or bad. You just read the headline and make that snap judgment. But actually stopping and thinking it through, and thinking about the implications around it, is incredibly important. So I had a student last year, a couple of years ago, that they did their research on their dissertation, looking at how refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants, like the language used within different media outlets to kind of portray those journeys, and to kind of see how that is reflecting in their different political connotations that they kind of have, or how they were leaning in different ways, and the danger that could potentially be when we're talking about the implications that has within society on how they're being viewed or spoken about, and then doing some comparisons around different either European countries and the same types of language that's used, to understand how that language may be making a difference. And so for that student, they were really keen to kind of go into journalism afterwards, and to go into that reporting, or talking about the movement of people and things, and looking at it in that way. So for them, that use of language and understanding the connotation around language in this subject matter was incredibly important. And I think it is how we can think about it and how we can view it is something that is incredibly important for our students to understand. But it's also something that we do within our school outreach, because we do a lot of outreach activities within the community. So during the earthquake in Turkey and in Syria a couple of years ago, I went and spoke at a local primary school to kind of talk about, they were keen to raise money, and I was consulting with the schools within one of the areas in Greater Manchester because they were trying to figure out which organization would be best
Yeah.
to kind of give the money to, because they didn't want to, they were so wary about making a mistake, but they really wanted to help. So thinking about not just saying this is the organization you should support, but here are some different questions you could look at within those organizations to help you form your conclusion on who you want to help as a school. Thinking about who may have access and actually be able to provide help, and who doesn't have access at the moment to the people who need help at that time. So there's a lot of that as well, of how do we kind of help equip the community to ask those questions so they don't then read or hear about something in the news and think, oh, well, we've done what everybody else was doing and now we kind of regret making that decision.
Yeah.
But instead, if they're equipped to ask the right questions, then at least they can say, well, we've done our research into this and we feel confident with the decision that we made, and we're happy with where we sent the money ultimately, or the resources or the goods, etc. Because I also faced questions from those schools about, our students want to send in their jackets, they want to send in this, they want to, donate clothes. Like, that is really kind and it's really thoughtful, but how are you going to get those clothes
Yeah.
to Syria to help post earthquake? Like,
Mhm.
logistically, it's very kind, but that will sit in a warehouse somewhere
Yeah.
and not actually be of any use. So instead, as much as crass as it kind of sounds, like, sending monetary donations at that point is the thing that can help the quickest and be most effective, because you don't need big trucks to transport that over. You don't need to think about how you're going to access it. You don't need to think about where you're going to store it or, distribute it, organize it. So even those logistics of trying to help the community in a way that they feel like they're making the most positive difference, and thinking about, it's great that they want to do a clothing drive, but perhaps thinking about some local organizations within Manchester, such as homeless organizations, or local to us is an organization called Fort Atlas that looks at domestic abuse and things like that. So those are the organizations that would really benefit from those resources, and they could be put to use tomorrow, next week. So thinking about how to be a bit strategic with how you're helping in different ways so that you're making the most positive difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm conscious of the time. Was there anything that we haven't spoken about yet that you're like desperate to sort of
Ooh, that
mention?
I'm desperate. Oh, well, I'm always desperate to kind of talk about this. I think one of the aspects that we haven't really spoken about that I think is really important is in terms of, like, what do our students do afterwards? So, like, in terms
Yes.
of careers, because that's always a question that I get, because a lot of students are kind of, they love the idea of this, but then actually they only see the job market as going in and being like someone who responds to a crisis.
Yeah.
And that's not always, if you've got a family and things, that's not always the thing that you can do.
Mm.
Um, so I think it is kind of important to think about careers within the humanitarian sector, but then also the careers that you can get from doing the degree just more generally.
Mhm.
So we do have, I was trolling through my HCRI alumni group that we have on LinkedIn, and I was having a little nosy at the different jobs everybody was doing and currently at. And we do have a lot of students that go into management positions at different organizations. So people working for traditional NGOs, so the non-governmental organizations like the Red Cross, MSF. We also have a more local organizations within that as well, or HALO, which is a mines disarmament group. Same thing with MAG. So they go and work for those organizations either in country or within the UK, but supporting those countries and supporting those operations that they have. But then we also have students that go into the more political side of it, so working for the UK government in think tanks and doing research and analysis on big topics. We have one of our students now works for the UN Security Council doing analysis. They've gone on to work in DC doing a number of different jobs. They work for Department of Defense sometimes. So we have people going into a lot of different sectors on that side. So you have those working for the non-governmental organizations. We have those working for governmental organizations. And then we have students going on and training to be teachers or doing a law conversion course and becoming human rights lawyers. We have students who I know one of my students at the moment is really keen to go in and be a journalist and look at kind of telling the stories of different individuals and how to do that in different ways. But I think it's about the skills that you're picking up and that we're hopefully like forcing you to learn while you're doing your degree, in terms of your presentation skills, public speaking skills, your written skills of policy briefs, blogs, podcasts, everything and anything of how to kind of present that information. Those are all key regardless of which direction you kind of go in. So we have students that go and do the traditional like graduate scheme kind of programs for corporations and industries. But what I've noticed while trolling through LinkedIn, a lot of those students that have done those graduate scholar schemes then go in and they end up being like sustainability and development officer within those corporations. So they're working for a big corporation, but in sustainability. So it's like, oh, I can see HCRI coming through right there. So it's, I think for any of the careers, when you then meet up and speak to students later on, they're just doing some of the most amazing things. So I'm always in awe when I get to meet back up with our students and have these conversations, bump into them at conferences or see them in organizations that they've created because they've noticed this gap in the sector. There's just such a drive and such a passion and enthusiasm that regardless of the sectors our students kind of go into, it really speaks of the profile of the students on our courses. This just ambition and drive, enthusiasm, and this willingness to try to enact positive change in whichever career they kind of go into afterwards. I obviously went down the academic route, and I really like reading, I suppose. And like I said, I can talk for ages. But there is that aspect. But I think it is that sense of just wanting to create that positive change. So for whatever career I think our students want to go in, it's important to have those conversations with your lecturers, with your colleagues in the department, and then also within the career service at Manchester. So we have a special careers fair every year, which our admin within our department put on and help organize, where we have alumni come, but we also have practitioners come. And to an extent, I feel like it's a bit of headhunting from our practitioners. They come every year because they know they get like top choice on our graduates coming out of it. So we have some really good relationships there. But I think it is also that opportunity to kind of see that journey and see how all of these different paths, how they look in different ways and how they develop over time. We have people come from early career who have just graduated. So what does it look like within the first 2 years of graduating, mid-career, late career, to kind of help build up that network and build up that potential for jobs and to show how it looks in different areas and different ways it can progress. So that's something that our students can all kind of benefit from. And a lot of those, we put some of them up on our YouTube channel as well. I think it's HCRI Institute on YouTube, something like that. And it's, so you can go back and kind of have a look at what our students are up to and doing. And then there's also we have a career service at Manchester where you can stay in touch with them for up to, I think it's like 2 years after you graduated, where they'll keep helping you with your CV and your cover letters and all of that kind of side, and really tweaking how you kind of go forward. And I always encourage my students when they're doing their dissertation or their assignments, thinking about that at the very start of their degree, if they're postgraduate and it's that 1-year course. Where are you hoping to take this? How are you shaping this program so it works for you? Because with it being so many different disciplines and different modules, optional modules that you can take, being able to have a story around your degree and around how that will reflect where you want to go with your degree and your career really helps in the long run in terms of marketing yourself when you're in interviews and things like that, in terms of saying, this is why I did my degree. This is what I'm hoping to achieve from it. And this is how it's going to contribute to my job in the long term. These are the skills I'm bringing to the table. I think that story is so important. So whether you're doing it with HCRI or you're doing courses elsewhere, thinking about how that degree is going to really help to shape who you are and your career going forward is so key, I think. And it brings so much more to the table by being able to say, this is how I'm going to contribute, as opposed to just saying, oh yeah, I did a degree on this, but it's all useless. Like, why have you done it? Why did you spend a year doing it? Like, university is fun, but that's a long time to just have fun for 3 years. So really think about it. That strategic story that you're kind of creating, I think, would be some good advice in terms of career, and how your degree fits into that.
Amazing. Oh, that's all fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today.
Happy to help, Emily. It's been really fun.
Thanks again to Amanda for her time. To find out more about the courses available from the Humanitarian and Conflict Response Institute, you can follow the link in the description. Make sure you give us a follow wherever you get your podcasts, and if you're enjoying Future You, make sure to leave us a review. If you want to get in touch, you can email at podcast@prospects.ac.uk or find us on Instagram and TikTok. All the links are in the description. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.